Hey, hello, welcome. Tonight we're going to try to explore the prohibition of Lashon Hara, which means to speak negatively. And the Pri Tzaddik tells us straight off the bat, Yedua di'ikar chet harishon haya be'achile. So we know, and I'm reading the source in Hebrew, but you can obviously check what it says in the English, but I will be translating it for you. Writes that the first sin of man from get-go. People think it was from eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but we're told immediately from the Pri Tzaddik that the sin of Adam was number one to do with the eating, but he writes here, "V'gam alidei lashon hara." The sin was essentially a composite sin associated with three or two particular entities, one of eating and one of speaking. And the speaking is that he says that he listened to Lashon Hara, as it says, he says that the Nachash, the snake, spoke Lashon Hara about Hashem, the creator of the universe. He says, to not believe in Hashem and to have a snake give you a perspective ulterior to that of Hashem, to speak negatively Hashem was the first sin. So we see, and the Pri Tzaddik takes this further, to say essentially this engagement with the tree of knowledge of good and evil wasn't just, again, consuming a fruit, but it had the energy of Lashon Hara in it. Now it goes a little bit further to tell us, in fact, there were two energy forces. One was a pagam of the bris, meaning there was an energy that took him into a licentiousness, which we're not going to go into this evening. But he writes, "V'gam b'lashon hara." It also had to do with the energy of Lashon Hara. And not only that, we learn, and I'm just reading all of the boldened aspects of this particular source. It says, "Shel bris Lashon Adam Arishon b'Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shnaim Olid Ruchin." It says that through one speech, they create something called ruchin. What are ruchin? Guys, there's some sheets down if you need. What are ruchin? Ruchin are energy forces. Through your speech, now you can imagine to be listening to Torah, and not only to be listening to Torah, to be listening to Torah in person. Wow, you're getting ruchin. You're getting some very powerful energy. Very powerful energy from the ruach, the winds of kedusha, of holiness. But when a person speaks Lashon Hara, we see yom moilid ruchin. Now, ruchin actually means spirits. And in fact, a person creates negative spirits or negative energy through speaking negatively. Not only that, we're told something unbelievably crazy. We all know that the ultimate goal is to reach a place called Eden. Ultimate place, Eden, Garden of Eden, a place of tranquility, a place of serenity, a place of connectivity. But we're told that there's something that guards us from entry into the garden. You know what that is? It says that there are shnei, or there is a cherev misapeches. There is a spinning sword, a double-edged sword. And he writes that this double-edged sword, each edge is made up of one particular sin. The first is the sin of sexual immorality, and the second is the sin of one's speech. And what it does is it prevents an individual entry into the Garden of Eden through the spinning, rotating sword, prevents that individual from entry. As it says, unbelievable. That sword, that blade, stems from a person's speech. So a pretty significant thing. You know, you think to yourself, a person thinks to themselves, come on. Okay, I just said something about this individual. I had to get it off my chest. I had to say, shtickle, and I had to talk about it, Okay, the guy's not going to hear it, big deal. He's got he's a strong guy. He'll manage. No. He might manage, but one person will surely not manage, and that's the person themselves that's speaking Lashon Hara. Because what that has just done has created a partition between themselves and their own inner tranquility, which we're going to have to explore and understand why. Look at the next bold element. As it says, unbelievable statement. These two particular sins create a buffer zone that prevent an individual from entry into sanctity, entry into connectivity. Now, the Pri Tzaddik tells us, how do you fix it up? What are you meant to do to fix up Lashon Hara? Okay, again, for those who don't know what we're talking about, we are speaking about a person who spoke negatively about someone else. Okay, you're sitting together with your friend, might go for a coffee, you might go for a walk on the promenade, and you say to them, hey, so-and-so, did you hear about what happened there? What happened? Oh, yes, tell me, I want to hear. Oh, well, let me tell you. So that's Lashon Hara, yeah? That's Lashon Hara, speaking slanderous, negative energy about other human beings. So the way to fix it up, which we're going to go much more deeply into understanding where this stems from and what really the frameworks are. And those who are at the back there, we do want you closer. You can come pull up some chairs here. We love to see your beautiful faces. We love to breathe in the ruchin, the spiritual energy of you with us learning Torah. So he writes that the way to fix up Lashon Hara is alidei yasok b'Torah, through studying Torah. Well, it makes somewhat of a sense where an individual, if they destroyed or created destructive energy through speech, what better constructive energy than studying Torah through speech? Ra Torasa lidei Torah. Yishmalhu taiva pogam abris. Chesed shebeklipa vaso esav ritzicha v'kas Lashon Hara. Unbelievable. So we won't go fully into these particular elements, but the Pri Tzaddik has a long essay in which he really fleshes out this idea. But what we need to gather from this is the first idea is that when a person creates particular energy with their mouth through the words they speak, that energy lingers. And that energy can create a buffer. And that buffer prevents them from entering into the Garden of Eden like a rotating sword that has two edges. Yes. Yeah. So Jesse asks, what's this buffer? Are we handing over our merits by speaking about someone else's? He's quoting, we know, when you speak about someone else negatively, you're actually handing over all of your merits that you've accrued. So how does that work? Okay, that's exactly tonight what we're going to try and figure out. What really is so problematic, and why do we not see such a deleterious energy being created by other sins that a person may be engaging with, God forbid. So let's have a look at the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. Amar Rav Chisda, this is a Gemara in Erechin. Rav Chisda taught Amar Ukva, this is source number 2. Nice beginning to the shiur, very, very positive concept that anyone who speaks slanderously about another individual, it is fitting for that individual who spoke slander to be stoned with a rock. Very, very positive, very exciting concept. Now, we know in Judaism that this is not just a punitive measure, that there's depth in everything that is taught. As he goes further on, we won't read the source or the proof where he takes us from, but I want to read to you the Ben Yoada. Listen to what the Ben Yoada says on this. What does it mean that they are fitting to be stoned with a stone? Now, we don't do this. Yeah, imagine in Shul, you heard someone speak Lashon Hara, you said, okay, come with me, and we would throw rocks at them. it would be a very well-attended synagogue, but that's not what we do. But it's definitely something we should keep in mind, that you saying we should do it, Philip. Yeah, maybe we'll consider it. But we do see something very powerful that comes out of this. Listen to this. The Ben Yehoyada asks, Lama skila? Why dafka? Why out of all punishments? I mean, we are very creative in Judaism, very creative people. I'm sure we can think of many other different punishments. Yeah, many different punishments. You know, the colloquial punishment is wash your mouth with soap. I would think that's a very good punishment. That would give a person a very good understanding that they've used their tongue in a sullied way and they must wash their mouth with soap. You agree? What would your punishment be? Peppers in the tongue. Yeah. Well, the Ben Yehoyada wants to take it a little bit further. He says, why don't you burn the oak? Burn him. Burn him. Why out of all punishments, we're going to use a stone? I mean, there's very particular measures for significant sins. Why out of all sins are we using a stone? Why also does it very much tell us he must be stoned with a stone? It can simply tell us he must get stoned. Now, we're not referring to that, okay? Please do not get confused what I was referring to right there. But here we are, no, clearly, the terminology, the sakel in Hebrew is a reference to skila, which is being chucked off a cliff, which was one of the punishments. And that was essentially stoning. Okay, we obviously don't do it today. And we also need to recognize that a Beis Din in Judaism, a court that killed one person in 70 years, was considered a court with blood on their hands. So we are not for the death penalty. We do not believe that we want to kill people. That is not part of Judaism. But we do need to understand severity. We need to understand that this is a sin. It is not a light-hearted sin, that a person is actually ra'ui. He's fitting to be stoned. Now, why specifically with a stone? Listen to what he says. Venerally, b'siyata d'shemaya. Abimasha Rabbeinu Arizal, I want to share with you what he says according to the Kabbalist Arizal. The Baal Lashon Hara goyrem l'salik ha'aras ha'tiferes min ha'malchus. He says, when you speak Lashon Hara, God forbid, about another individual, you cause harmony. But more so than harmony, you cause beauty to be removed from the energy of this world. You take and you remove all the succulent nature, all of the unbelievable energy that's implicit within creation, and you suck it dry through your Lashon Hara. And what we refer to this is removing tiferes, which means beauty, mina malchus, from the manifest spiritual energy of this world. Hara, that's why it tells us you need to have skila. Skila, again, who remembers, is what? Stoning. But the word skila also comes from the word yisalik. Same letters. Yisalik means that you've taken away the vital energy of this world. So much so that you're left with an empty stone. A stone is an inanimate object. You've essentially taken out all of the animate energy within this world, all of the capability that we have of speaking, and you've destroyed it by using it for negativity. Now he ends off by saying, now he's specifically stoned with a stone. Why? Because he should have been like a stone. What does it mean that he should have been like a stone? Should have been quiet. There are certain circumstances that you should be like a stone, which means you feel like saying something, you want to get something off your chest to an individual. We'll see that there's certain halachas regarding if there's a necessity to speak about something, or you need to speak to a therapist or to your spouse to get something off your chest. That's something else. But to negatively engage just because you feel like negatively engaging is one of the worst sins that a person can engage with. And we're told he should have been like a stone. Now listen to this next source, another Gemara. It says, Amar Chista, source number 4, Amar Mar Ukfa, Kol Mesapet Lashon Hara. Now this is unbelievable. Listen to this energy. You think it was enough to get stoned, but we then encountered the concept of an individual having a buffer between themselves and the Garden of Eden. Listen to what the Gemara tells us further. Hashem says himself, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ein ani vehu yochoilin nadu be'olam. I and that individual that just spoke Lashon Hara are not able to live in the same place in the world. I cannot stomach such an individual. I have to remove my energy from that person. I can't live in the same world as that person. You want to speak Lashon Hara? You're on your own. I'm out. That's what Hashem says. I masalik myself, God says. Very similar to what we saw from the Ben Yehuda about the stone, removing the godliness from this world. So listen again, what we're doing tonight, just at the beginning here, is we're getting a quick overview of the sources, but then we're going to dig deeply into the essence of Lashon Hara to try and understand how to heal it. But all of these sources are giving us a broad understanding, and we're going to use them as pieces to really start to put the tapestry of understanding the depth behind this particular sin. Listen to what Shmiras HaLashon by the Chofetz Chaim, who famously wrote the Sefer, the book about guarding one's tongue. He says, very appropriately in terms of the time frame that we're in currently, V'loi charava Yerushalayim b'mikdash sheni. Jerusalem was destroyed in the second temple Eile ba'avon misapre lashon hara shebeneim. For one reason and one reason only. Because people spoke about one another. That's the only reason why Jerusalem was destroyed. B'shul sinas chenem she'abehem. That was stemming from an inner hatred between the individuals. Okay. So some significant aspects there. And as we said in source number 6, who remembers is the way to rectify Lashon Hara? Who remembers what we said? How do you rectify Lashon Hara? You study Torah. Very good, David. It says you must study Torah. And if you don't know Torah, if you don't have a transformative Tuesday to go to, if you don't have access to the Eden app or the Rejuvenate app or many other apps online, what are you meant to do? So he says, Yashtul Dato. You need to humble yourself. Sure. Interesting. Lashon Hara has something to do with arrogance, something to do with humbling yourself. What does that mean? So let's look at one final source before we start digging deeper. Look at source number 7. Source number 7 is another teaching from the Ben Yehuda, who says something fascinating. He says that there are 4 winds. How many winds are there in Cape Town? Winds. 2 predominant winds. Which ones are they, Jesse? Northwest and southeast. Okay, 2 winds. But in fact, we are learning here that there are actually 4. 4 predominant winds that exist in Cape Town, but not only in Cape Town, wherever you live, you will find these winds. They exist inside of you. Listen to what he says. There are 4 winds. What are these winds? They come from different energies. One is the energy of lying, falsehood. A person who cannot control their inability to tell a lie or create falsehood is a person struck by the wind of shakranus. The kas leitzim. The next wind comes from an individual that mocks just makes a mockery of everything. They can't have any gravitas around anything. Everything's mockery. We can't hold any spaces because it's all mockery. In a space where there is mockery, you don't have the ability to connect deeply. Then the third one is the kas chanofim, which is the energy of those who are machnef. Machnef means they create a sense of flattery. So they come up to people, they use flattery to try and get people onto their side. And then the last one is those who speak Lashon Hara. Now, I'm sure you could guess which is the worst one. Let's see. The kulam chatayim b'dibur, all of these are dealing with speech and particularly are associated with wind. Why? Because all speech comes from the energy of wind. In fact, it comes from something called your ruach, which is your inner emotional spirit. That's why when you have your emotions are depleted and you can't speak. But we see here that the winds of an individual affects their speech. Now listen to what he says about the direction of the wind. Look at the next paragraph. He writes, "V'ruach marvis remez leleitzanus." The northern wind is a wind that affects leitzanus, mockery. He says because it comes from the marav. Marav is like the sense of sweetness and mixture. So they mix into everything and they mock everything. Where they think they'll make a joke out of everything. They're always trying to make things sweeter because they're bored or they're trying to get attention. So they mix everything with their perceived sweetness of joking and mockery. And listen to this. Ruach dromes, the southern wind, is the wind that affects Lashon Hara. So much so that this is no offense to anyone who lives in South Africa. He says here, ki droimis, the word droimis. You know how to say South Africa in Hebrew? Drom Africa. Yeah, Drom is South Africa of Africa. So here, droimis, the southern wind, is actually made up of the Hebrew words dar, which means to dwell, maves. Maves means death. So the southern wind, which creates the energy of Lashon Hara, is a wind that comes from the dwelling of death. Crazy statement. Now he writes in the last part of this that this southern wind, which represents Lashon Hara, is the worst out of all of them. If you want to learn about the other winds, you must go into these paragraphs. But he says that the southern wind is the worst out of all of them because the Gemara tells us which are the three most problematic sins in Judaism that a person needs to die for: murder, idolatry, and adultery. Now, can you believe this? That the Gemara tells us it's kneged gimel averos chamuros, avodah zarah gilaras shvichas damim, ulepam mehoyer nefashos mamish. He says it's analogous to the energy of murder, idolatry, and adultery. Pretty hectic statements. The Gemara is not just pulling your leg. I promise you that. It is some hectically volatile spiritual energy when a person speaks negatively about someone else. Now, turn to source number 10. Source number 10, before we start to dig in, tells us one final element. Dama Rava. Rava says, the Bai Chaim, person who wants life, you want to experience life, you want to tap into life, watch your tongue. He says, Bilishne, you must watch what your tongue does, how you speak, and how much Torah you engage with your ruach, with your spirit. You want life? Make sure that those two components, obviously what you consume in terms of food is another entity. But then he says, Debai Misa, you want death? Belishne. That's also found in your tongue. Death and the energy of death is manufactured in your mouth by how a person speaks. Okay, now let's try and understand this. Before we go deeper into this, any questions, statements, comments? Are we all clear so far? Do we all get some sense of the negativity and the absolutely abrasive energy that our tongues can create through speaking negatively about another human being? Now, listen to this fascinating Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara is going to open up for us what really is underlying the energy of a person who cannot hold their tongue back. What do you guys think it is? What would you say is this really underlying energy that causes a person to have the inability to not speak about someone else? What do you think it comes from? Lust? Emptiness? Insecurity? Wanting to hurt or revenge, a vengefulness? Good. Or that a person in themselves is hurting. Yeah, they're hurting in themselves. So they want to hurt back, or they feel like they don't know what to do. So listen to what the Gemara tells us. Speaking of winds, it would be quite appropriate to turn to the Gemara that tells us about wind. The Gemara tells us, Vala ruchos, a person has an actual blessing they should recite on a gale force wind. Last night, my dog was very, very scared because of the wind. Yes. Was very scared. But nevertheless, my ruchos, Amarabaya, Zapa. What are winds? We're referring to gale force winds. Vamarabaya, Gemiri. Listen to this. Abaya taught. The Zapa beleilaya loyhave. You ready for this? You will never find gale force winds at night. So you can go tell my dog Betty, who was flipping out last night because of the winds, that no, she's hearing things. Whatever thing she thinks is happening is not actually happening. No winds at night. Never happens. There are no gale force winds at night. They're only in the day. Make sense? Can we move on? No. Because the Gemara doesn't want to move on, because it says, Vaha kachazinan dahave. We have seen many, many times gale force winds at night. Promise you that. So you know what the Gemara answers? Hahu da aschel b'yamama. No. Those winds started at the beginning of the day. They started in the day. So what we see here is no gale force winds ever begin at night. It only ever starts in the day. All right? Now, simple question. Why do we need to know that? Why is that an important piece of information? Maybe you want to know if you can make a blessing on this. You only saw it start at night. Maybe that's a good indication that it's not gale force. So we're going to now see the deeper spiritual secret behind what this Gemara means. Zogt the Ben Yoada again. The Ben Yoada tells us, Nirali b'siyata d'shmaya tam, this is source number 12. Api masha kosva mefarshim mepasok yoytze harim of ruach uvare ruach umagilada masir seichei. The pasuk in Amos says that Hashem created mountains and He created winds, and those come to teach a person about their speech. Ki yesh harim gedolim. There are many big mountains. Ad moed. And Hashem only created those mountains to protect places of civilization from metoikev ruach zara. If there weren't mountains, those places will be swept away by winds. It's only the protection of those mountains that allow the winds to be dulled, that doesn't allow that place of civilization to be blown away. He said, if not for these mountains, everything would be destroyed because of the force of these winds. These mountains, they stop the severity of the winds. Listen to this. The reason why Hashem created very powerful winds, that you need mountains to protect you, for one particular reason. Hashem created winds, not for the surf. Hashem created winds to tell us about how we are speaking. To tell us how we are speaking. What type of wind are we creating? What type of energy, ruach, are we creating through our speech? As it says, because when a person sins with their speech, which is the wind that fills them, when there is too much negative wind from what they've done, that access or that causes negative wind to exist in the world. Now, what does this have to do with the day and the night? We're meant to learn musar. We're meant to learn character building from the wind. When you see a wind and you see it being destructive and it blows something over, you have to say to yourself, 1 second, my speech, I don't see it, just spoken and it dissipated. It can't do anything. It can't destroy anything. Just like you can't really see the wind, can you? But look at its destruction. Same to when a person speaks, a person has to learn from the wind to say, wow, I have to acknowledge what my speech does. Now he points out very simply, on a very basic level, why this has to do with day and night. What would you guys say? What does it have to do with day versus night? Why does wind never begin at night? What would you suggest? Anyone? What? People are sleeping at night. That's exactly what the Ben Yada says. People are out and about during the day. They're having conversations, seeing people getting annoyed at people, so they've got things to speak about. At night, they're not interacting. Very simple. But not so simple when you read what Rav Kook says. And these, what we're about to read, are some of the most transformative words you can ever read. What he says right now is some of the most transformative Torah that a person can engage with. Listen to these words from Ein Ayah on this specific Gemara in Brachos. Listen to what he says. I'm going to read it to you in Hebrew. Actually, I haven't translated this one, but I'm sure you could put it into ChatGPT. Yesh b'zeh Hara. I want to share with you, he says, a very deep insight on this Gemara. B'dimyon ha'adam aprati, regarding a person, regarding a human being. Shu oilam katan ela oilam agato. We need to understand that there is an analogy and a similarity between a human being and the world out there. Every time something happens in the world, it's an indication of something happening inside of you. Hevdel laila miyom. What is the difference between night and day? Again, we're on a source which has no number. That makes it a very special source. It's the source just after source 12 and just before source 13. It's like a Valdic source. A source with no number must be a special source. So he says here that the difference between night and day, the daytime is where a person has connection to the external world. Again, this is definitely not at a time when we have smartphones and Netflix and all different forms of distractions that actually probably pull us even more now into an external world through distraction and all of those elements. But back then, nighttime was an inner world. Daytime was a very, very external world. And at night, a person would be connected or able to connect to their inner world. Now, there's no doubt that this is why so many people struggle with depression and anxiety, because they don't have an inner world anymore. Even their night has turned into day. Even their night is now a night or time that they have to draw themselves into the external world. Most people go to sleep looking at their phone or looking at the TV. How you expect yourself to have any sense of serenity or normality when there's no connection to the inner world? He says, if an individual sees that there is too much going on in themselves, and they turn to an inner world, and they fill their inner world without being drawn into the external world, listen to these words, my friends. These are fundamental words. If a person is able to reconnect themselves to their inner silent world that is not connected to the external noise, the majority of their life, he says, is a life of tranquility and peace. A person who doesn't have an inner world, a person who's constantly dependent and reliant on individuals and opinions and perceptions and how they fit into society and what society, looks them at as, that individual will never, ever be able to satiate their desires and their need to be seen in a particular way. The only time a person is able to live a life of tranquility and peace is when they have discovered their nighttime, their inner world. Because listen to this next statement, crazy statement. Hashem created us innately good, innately straight. Listen to this. Inside of yourself, you will always find tranquility, relaxation, a straightness, and a righteousness. Now, again, not righteousness like, oh, I'm so spiritually righteous, but just a simplicity, just a space of truth. The inner world of a person is always in a space of simplicity and goodness and tranquility and relaxation. A person's heart is not troubled by anything in that inner space. They're not taken by the winds of negativity of this world. The three big negative forces of this world, which are what? Jealousy, hatred, and honor. Three big negative forces that are the forces that create these negative winds is jealousy. Oh, I'm so upset that I don't have that. That person has that. Why do they get this? Oh, I'm so frustrated. What? Imagine you never had to compare yourself with anyone. Imagine all you had was your life in front of you. That's it. No one else around. Imagine how much more menucha, how much more tranquility you would have. Sinner, hatred. Oh, I hate that person. Oh, why? Why do you have to experience that negative? Who are you doing that to? You're doing that to yourself. You think that there's a pleasure in that hatred, but that hatred is an acid that is eating you from within. Or kavod. Kavod is this necessity to always be perceived by the other, seen by the other, held by the other, valued by the other. You know why a person needs those energy forces? Because they don't see, value or hold or love themselves. They don't have an inner world. They don't have the nighttime. The nighttime is spent on their phone, perusing social media, seeing what's going on in the news. There's a rash. The external day world is a world that creates an awakened space of jealousy against others and other many, many negative forces that create noise internally. Okay. That's why the Gemara says a gale force wind will never be created or start at night. Doesn't happen. It never finds its place at night because a person that's internally calibrated, a person that is connected to their inner essence and harmony, doesn't care to speak about other people. They don't get nothing to get off their chest because they're in their chest and they're calm. They're connected. They're not dependent. Misgeres yad taiva umenias sheket epinimi. Listen to this advice from Rav Kook. He says, if you've ever find yourself in a scenario that you don't know why, you don't have any external reasons that you're experiencing an unhealthy desire or something's causing you from not feeling an inner tranquility, loiba ki'im. It's only coming from one thing, because you've lost your inner part of self. You've become too subsumed by the external world. That's where it's coming from. And that's what he's saying here, that we have to capture our nights. We have to be able to find that night. I mean, this is the night there where the terminology, the knight in shining armor, comes from. This is where the saving of energy comes into our life, is from our night. Now we're going to conclude with the following idea from the Kli Yakar, and then we'll conclude with one short piece from Rav Kook. Listen to what the Kli Yakar reveals to us about the concept of Lashon Hara. He writes, "Batsura sheboy hanaga." There is a punishment that we know in the Torah. A person who speaks Lashon Hara gets punished. You know what they get punished with? Something called tsaras. Tsaras is colloquially translated as leprosy, but it isn't. It's a deeper form of a spiritual malady that affects their skin and affects all different elements and discolorations. And what has to happen is what happens to a Mitzoira? They get sent out of the camp. And not only they get sent out of the camp, what else? They have to keep their hair disheveled. They have to keep their clothing torn, and they have to keep it up to their lips covered. And they shout out when anyone would come near to them, they would shout out, "Tameh, tameh," impure, impure. Now listen to what the Kli Yakar says. Why does the Torah tell us a leper that has been afflicted? Let me ask you a question, the Kli Yakar says. Surely if they're already a leper, they're already afflicted? Good question. If they already have leprosy, that's already an affliction. If a person has been struck with a malady, they're afflicted. So why do you have to tell me the leper that's been afflicted? Everyone hear the question? He says, "Umekan raya, shetzaras sham hamake mavur lemalev chen yisbar besamuch beparshas mitzoyer nega kinui ala avain כאחויתא נגע בכבוד שמיים וכבוד הבריות, וזה דאס המדרש אומר כנגע נראה לי בבייס זה על זה. על כן אמר כאן על הצורה שנלקה בצערס, על שסיפר לשון הרע לפקע עם הבריאות וקבלס, רז"ל שכל הפויסל במומו poisel. Fascinating and important statement. You ready for this statement? Anyone who undermines, anyone who is poisel, bemumoi poisel. The word poisel means who is derogatory about something else or about someone, is essentially pointing back at themselves, as we know the classic finger pointing at another, having 4 fingers or 3. So 3 back at themselves. Yes. So call a poisel b'mumoy poisel. Anytime you're pointing one finger at someone else, you're essentially revealing that you yourself are empty. And that's this concept here. That the reason why it says the leper is afflicted is to tell us that internally they're afflicted. Internally, they have a negativity that they have not been able to heal. And that's why they're spewing that forth about other individuals. Now, listen to where it stems from. Who remembers? What is the first thing that we said that a Metzoira has to do? Something to do with their hair. Their hair needs to be unkept. Why? He says, the first comes from an individual that wants to be the best, wants to be on top, wants to be the head. And that's why they speak Lashon Hara. They want to be better than someone else. Now, how do I get better? Well, let me disparage everyone, and that makes me better. By definition, I'm better than them. So the first thing they have to do is make their hair disheveled, to show that that disheveled space of you wanting to be the head is what caused you to be in this circumstance of negativity. Then his clothing needs to be torn. The God of you, frumim, sounds maybe where the word frum comes from. Frumim sounds geschmack. So frumim means that it has to be torn. Lechapel at saras ayin. He called sar ayin mistamagam begad of kruim mitalayim. Listen to this. You know what the next energy force that causes Lashon Hara to come from? One's inability to see holistically. All they do is get this myopic view of something, and they hone into that myopic energy. And all they see is that negativity. And that's what they hone into. That's called saras ayin. That's like when they squint and all they can see is that little thing. Open your eyes. Did you know that there's a bigger concept here? There's a bigger circumstance. Do you know all the circumstance, all the picture? We're told that the biggest sin of the Jewish people, and you'll notice this on Tisha B'Av, is that in Eicha we read, and it says in Eicha, this is Lamentations, every sentence of Lamentations follows the Aleph base. But in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th chapter, you'll notice there's a mistake. The letter Pei, which is meant to follow the letter Ayin, is swapped. In Lamentations, it starts off by the sentence on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in those chapters. It starts off with the Pei, followed by the Ayin. Why is that the case? So the Kabbalists revealed to us the letter Pei is also the Hebrew word for the word Peh, which is the mouth. And the letter Ayin is the Hebrew word for one's eyes. One's inability to utilize their vision to see a holistic picture, to potentially see positively, to potentially say, you know what, that person might have a horrible day. They're being reasonably unreasonable. Why do I have to speak negatively about them? That inability to see broadly is what caused them to be in the state of stingy vision. And a person with stingy vision doesn't have the ability to even see that their clothes are in the right state. They don't even want to spend a cent because they're so constricted in themselves. That's why the beged, the garment, is frazzled. And the final one here, he says, is kemetame bonev svasav acherem asvasam yate lechaber alachet elashem misvasav v'tame tame yikra. And the last thing he says is he calls out impure, impure. Kemetame beniv svasayim acherem as tame yikra gamhu kivada bemumoy poisol. The reason why he calls out tame, tame, why does he say it twice? Impure, impure, is anyone that causes something else to be called impure and is negative about their surroundings is an indication of their own inner disconnection from their nighttime, from their inner world. So to conclude, we see the last bits from Oilas Raya, the teachings of Rav. Listen to what he says. In qualitative terms, the heart's inner holiness transcends entire worlds. Again, listen to what that means. Our inner essence, if you turn into yourself right now and you ask yourself, who am I at my core? So you might have external elements of fear, boredom, concern, discomfort, but at one's core, who are they? So he writes that at one's core, their heart's inner holiness transcends worlds. Your inner essence transcends everything. You got nothing to worry about, nothing to fear, nothing to be negative about, nothing to feel uncomfortable about. Your heart at its core is endless and transcends all. But quantitatively, it may be overwhelmed and stifled by the rush of everyday life. Sounds very familiar. So one's essence becomes swept up by the tide, or let's more appropriately use, by the winds of our day-to-day. Therefore, God provided us with a second external gift, the power of holy speech. What that means is one of the biggest mitzvahs in the Torah is to speak Torah, to study Torah. Remember what we said originally in the Gemara, and from the Pri Tzaddik who quoted that Gemara, is the way to rectify Lashon Hara is by using your speech positively. Now, how does that work? Is it just 1 + 1? How is it working here? Oh, we don't want to use negative speech, so we're going to use it positively. Easy, nice mathematical equation. No. When we verbalize God's holy words in Torah study and prayer, when a person uses their mouth to speak out and verbalize Torah, to speak out and verbalize prayer, we are able to revive the dormant holiness of the inner heart. How does it work that when a person stops breathing, you resuscitate them by breathing into them? What happens here is an individual in themselves, when they've lost their inner world, the way to rectify it is to resuscitate them with holy speech. The purpose of that resuscitation is to awaken their inner essence and revive their inner core, which is essentially positive. The lofty kernel, I mean, these words, you can't make them up. The lofty kernel, our true essence, is like a princess who was kidnapped against her will. We may rescue her by employing our faculty of holy speech. This is the secret power of speech when it articulates the hidden treasures residing in the soul. This is why, my friends, one of the most important frameworks to be a person who's connected is to study Torah. Day and night, and specifically at night, but even more in the day, at the beginning of the day, because the nighttime, you've got time. I mean, now we struggle with that. But in the morning, where you have to counter the energy of the day, if you're not speaking Torah in the morning, you're out. Your inner essence gets lost to the noise of the world, and you don't know what's going on. You don't know why you're unhappy. What the Torah does is it slows down and revives the inner essence, that fountain of life starts to flow forward. To speak about someone else? Are you crazy? What's the last thing you want to do? What's this other person got to do with me? Why would I want to share my lifeblood? Why do I want to spill it on the floor? For what reason? I want to conserve my lifeblood. I like it. It's only a person that hates themselves that is going to spill their lifeblood out with negativity. And this is essentially why Lashon Hara creates that buffer zone between an individual and the Garden of Eden. Because when they've implemented this mechanism to give themselves a false sense of security and a false sense of importance and grandeur and power, they've lost and precluded themselves from accessing their inner essence, which is the Garden of Eden. That's why Hashem can't dwell with them. Gone, bye-bye. We're living in two different worlds. That's why you and the stone could be great mates. Because just like that stone is bereft of any life, so to you are fitting to be stoned with that stone because you are bereft from any life. And that's essentially the revelation here, where speech, where our inner core, where the external world and all of the noise that it provides is really all in a space of topsy-turvy. And we need to find that clarity that the Torah and that humility, which we saw the Yash Bildate, humility, quietness, is able to give us. Thank you, my friends, for joining us tonight. Any questions? Comments? Statements? Is this clear? Do you want me to switch off the shir so you can ask a question? No. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us online, and for all those who joined us in person. Please, God Hashem should bless us with the ultimate blessing of our inner world being revived, the inner purity and the innate goodness that we exist within, and to not be so subsumed by all of the noise that is external to us. At least if there's one thing we can take away from this, obviously it's not to speak Lashon Hara. Don't use your mouth ever to speak negatively about someone unless it's for the purpose of positivity, i.e. that you need to warn a person, unless you are so deeply troubled that you need to get it off your chest by talking to someone that cares for you and that you need to try and get some insight for, because this is really hurting you and you need to understand how to engage with this, but not just to willy-nilly destroy and disparage and create negativity in this world. Because the only person that you're doing that negativity to is yourself. So please, God, Hashem should create a framework of inner harmony, inner awakened states, and an access really to the words of Ruach HaKodesh, which is through the Torah. Should be with bracha.